Good evening and welcome. I will now call the Governance and Policy Committee meeting of January 20. Just a moment. Good evening and welcome. I will now call the Governance and Policy Committee meeting of January 28, 2026 to order. Just a moment, we're having some sound issues. Try this again. Good evening and welcome. I will now call the Governance and Policy Committee meeting of January 28, 2026 to order. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and our schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewa of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest? There is no declarations of interest at this time. Can I please have a motion to approve the agenda as distributed? Thank you, Trustee Dracula. All in favor? The agenda is approved. Can I please have a motion to approve the draft minutes of the Governance and Policy Committee meeting of December 10th, 2025? Thank you, Trustee Brown. All in favor? The minutes are approved. Request for comment for Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. The minutes are okay. Just a comment, though, on process, in that we approved some amendments to the policy, and then when the policy came to the board, it said refer to the agenda. They had a link to the agenda, which did not reflect. You'd have to search through the document to find the amended changes. And so I'm just a sort of a suggestion or maybe a request that if we make some amendments to a document, but still approve it, but make some amendments, when it goes to board, if we could get the cleaned version, amended version in the board package, because otherwise we have to search back to the previous minutes, which we just approved now, to figure out what the amendments were. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. The next item on the agenda is the revised communications policy, and now I'd like to invite Senior Manager Galen Eagle to present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my excitement tonight to share a revised communication policy to the group this evening. So I'll start with the report. The purpose of this report is to present the revised communication policy for consideration and approval of the Board of Trustees. The communication policy establishes governance level direction for how communications are undertaken on behalf of the Durham District School Board. It sets out the board's principles, expectations, and accountability related to communications in support of student achievement and well-being, public trust and confidence, and strong relationships with students, families, and community. This policy, as you will see, is intentionally focused on governance and does not prescribe operational processes or practices. The accompanying communications procedure and media relations procedure, both which are new, were reviewed and approved by admin council, and they are provided to you in this board report for information and to offer context on how the policy direction will be operationalized in practice. So just a little bit of a background on this communications policy. The last communication policy was revised and approved in 2011, so 15 years ago, and it consists of a single high-level statement regarding two-way communication. So you will see the previous communications policy in your report package. So while it established general intent, it does not provide contemporary governance direction for communications in a complex and a risk-sensitive communications environment, nor does it reflect current expectations related to transparency, accessibility, consistency, and public trust. I think you can imagine in the past 15 years, the communications landscape in the public education sector has evolved significantly, and so have the needs and the complexity of the Durham District School Board as it's experienced a significant growth in that time period. There's increased public expectations for timely and accessible information, expanded digital communication channels, heightened media scrutiny, and evolving legislative requirements. So in this context, a modern communications policy is required to clearly articulate board-level principles, expectations, and accountability for communications undertaken on behalf of the DDSB. So why now? Why are we bringing this forward to you now? The policy provides governance level direction. Given the age and limited scope of the existing policy, which again was last approved in 2011, a comprehensive refresh was required to ensure the board's government framework reflects the realities of today's communications environment. It was among one of my first priorities as being someone new in the senior communications role to ensure that the communications policy and its related procedures reflect the modern practices that we undergo on a day-to-day basis to support student and family communications. Communications play such a central role in supporting student achievement and well-being, maintaining public trust and confidence, managing risk, and strengthening relationships with our key communities. So a modern policy is necessary to clearly articulate board-level principles, expectations, and accountability for communications while leaving the operational details to the new procedures. With respect to consultation, the revised communications policy is informed by a combination of internal staff review, system-wide consultation data, and analysis of a 2024 DDSB communications audit. So internal review was undertaken within the communications department and through consideration by administrative council with a focus on governance clarity, alignment with legislative and policy requirements, and the appropriate separation of government's directions from operational implementation. The heart of this policy is grounded in system-wide consultation conducted as part of the board's multi-year strategic plan, which engaged students, families, staff, and community members. Feedback gathered through that consultation, which was significant consultation, emphasized the importance of clear, timely, consistent, and accessible communication as foundational to trust, engagement, and shared purposes across the system. And you will find those principles and ideals embedded in this new communications policy. In addition, the policy is informed by a comprehensive communication audit conducted between February and May 2024 with support from external consultants and the regional internal audit team. The review included surveys and thought exchanges with staff, students, parents, caregivers, as well as interviews and focus groups with key individuals and groups. The review identified system-level opportunities to strengthen consistency, coordination, internal communication, and strategic alignment in communication practices. These findings reinforced the need for clear governance direction while reserving operational detail for procedures. So I think I'll just land on the last 2 points of the report, and then I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the policy. With respect to risks and opportunities, I think the clear governance risk is without clear governance direction for internal and external communications, there is a risk of inconsistent practices across the system, things that we heard in that communication audit. This can lead to confusion, perceived lack of transparency, and increased reputational and government risk for the board. It can also lead to the emergence of informal or unsustainable expectations regarding communication standards and responsiveness. The revised communication policy provides us with the opportunity to offer clear governance direction related to internal and external communications and creates an opportunity to strengthen consistency, clarity, and trust across the DDSB community. By establishing shared principles and expectations, the policy supports more coordinated communication practices aligned with board priorities and public trust. There are no current immediate financial implications with respect to the approval of this revised communication policy. And it is my recommendation that the Governance and Policy Committee consider and approve the revised communication policy included as Appendix A and recommend it for final approval at the next regular board meeting of the Board of Trustees. Through you, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions that trustees may have at this time.
Thank you, Senior Manager Galen Eagle. Is there a trustee willing to move the recommendation included in the report? Thank you, Trustee Cunningham. Discussion and debate of the motion is now open, and I would like to offer the first speaker opportunity to speak. Our next speaker will be Trustee Brown.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I have a few questions, if it's okay. I've got 2 or 3 questions to ask. Right, so I'm on page 13, and I'm looking at 8.0 under evaluation, and noted that it says this policy shall be reviewed at least every 5 years. Personally, I think it needs to be a shorter time of 2 to 3, as it's such a new policy, and 5 years may be too long because we're living in an age where things are evolving so quickly, especially around communications and how we communicate. So I feel that that should be looked at. 5 years may be too long, and I'm not sure where the rationale came from, but that's what I saw. And I'm thinking about how even social media works. You know, it changes so quickly.
I'd be happy, through you, Chair, I'd be happy to answer that question. So when we brought previous, I think it was the last governance and policy meeting, we wrapped up the process on the policy and policy procedure and policy development. And I know there's been some ongoing work with the committee over the last few months and going into the beginning of the school year about the cadence that we happen to be looking at policies and procedures. And if I can speak frankly, we are in a position where we're going to be presenting this committee with the culmination of that policy development work next meeting in February, and kind of a look at what our plan is to ensure all of our policies and procedures are reviewed in a timely manner. So the frank part is that we have hundreds of out-of-date policies and procedures right now, and in order to accommodate getting those updated in a reasonable and in a reasonable time period, we've selected 5 years as that, and I believe 5 years is going to be an ambitious goal as is. So we are ramping up with the senior team in terms of creating accountability measures at the senior team level to be consistently bringing more policies to approval at this committee. And we are going to be committed going forward to bringing a roster of policies for you in advance so that you can see what policies are coming down the pipeline for a given month. But getting through the current slate of policies in 5 years is going to be an ambitious task, to say the least. So I really appreciate your commentary on the unique nature of communications. And if it is the will of the trustees tonight, we can easily bring forward this for approval or renewal in 3 years' time. I just wanted to let you know that's where that 5 years came from, is it's kind of a blanket approach, just given where we are in our policy and procedure development framework. And it's kind of been applied globally so that we can reach our goals of having all of our policies and procedures regularly updated in a cadence of 5 years.
Thank you. Me again. Right, so I'd noticed on page 16 that we included the regulation. Is that for our reference, or is this part of the new policy? And does it tag on to the policy? Because then, if it does, the regulation may need updating.
Thank you for your question. Through you, Chair. The regulation is rescinded. As part of a previous motion, all regulations were either migrated to procedure or policy. That regulation is simply there for your reference. It has been replaced in content. To be quite frank, a lot of that regulation was outdated, but the pieces that were perhaps relevant have been incorporated into either the policy or the communications procedure. So it is simply there for your reference. That regulation will cease to exist.
Thank you, Senior Manager Galen. Are there any other questions or comments from trustees? Recognizing Trustee Jackula.
Thank you. I've been thinking about this for a while, and it seems like this is probably the appropriate forum to mention this. And it's about the methods of communication. And I think that the board should think seriously about not using social media for our way of communicating with people. If students, parents, families, caregivers, etc., are notified that the DDSB will no longer be using social media and all updates will be posted on our website, there would be a very quick transition from everyone when it comes to finding what they need. Well, it is easy to put something out on social media. We also need to appreciate that what we're doing is inviting our students to look at their social media. When we know what the harms of social media are, and that there are currently numerous lawsuits against the various social media companies that have at their root the fact that they cause irreparable harm to students. To me, I don't see any difference between notifying people on social media about what's happening with the DDSB and putting it on our website. Once everyone is notified, they will now know where to go look. And I think that if we really have our students' best interest at heart, we will not be posting on social media anymore.
Thank you for your commentary. We move to Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Listening to what Trustee Brown said, I would like to put forward a motion to have the communications policy reviewed in 3 years. I understand the blanket 5-year suggestion, but to Trustee Brown's point, communication does move quite rapidly. So I would like to put that motion on the floor.
Thank you, Trustee Cunningham. At this current time, there's a motion on the floor, and I will turn to the mover. Sorry, can I have a mover of the motion? Trustee Cunningham. And so it is moved. I will allow for Trustee Cunningham to be the first speaker to the motion.
Thank you. I think I did speak to it as I put it forward. I heard Trustee Brown's question, and it made sense to me, and I think we should be reviewing it sooner.
Questions and comments from trustees?
Thank you. One of the comments I have is that I know in our policy is basically, it says a maximum of 5 years. I'm pretty sure it says a maximum of 5 years, and that at any point in time, trustees could request for a policy to move ahead of schedule if they find that it's not being effective or something needs to change since the situation changed. So I think that, you know, our general policy here, communication policy and following process, that our previous thing says all policies will be reviewed in, you know, basically at a minimum every 5 years, but we have the opportunity. So I don't think that is, we need to put a motion to say that specifically for this one, because then we're going to start looking at all policies and saying, okay, well, we want with this one for 2 years and we want with this for 4 years. I think we all already have within our policy development policy is that we can put something forward before schedule. The only difference is now we will have a schedule. So I think it's kind of redundant, and I wouldn't support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. I turn to Trustee Oldfield.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I guess the question I have is, as a department, do you on a regular basis, an annual basis, review the policy yourselves? Because that makes me, when I think about communications, and I think to the point of a number of trustees, things change quickly. Or maybe slowly, and then all of a sudden it's changed. So I don't know if it matters if it's 3 years, 5 years. I think that we need to be able to be on it, monitoring it, and be able to bring it forward if it needs to, if things need to be changed. So my question is, and it may not be something that trustees catch necessarily, but I'm just wondering if this is what the department does.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. If I can paint a picture of a sandwich for you, so the policy is the top piece, the procedure sits kind of in the middle, and then we have an internal communications framework that kind of covers internally how we coordinate between the different departments and share information. That framework is probably the most consistently reviewed in terms of always in kind of a dynamic document always being updated. The procedure would be probably the second piece that would change on a more regulation base. In 5 years in now, I still think the principles of open, transparent, two-way communication is probably still going to be our governing model. But that being said, I do agree that communications moves at a lot faster speed. I'd love to see this renewed before it hits 15 years again. So I'm happy to take the directions in terms of how soon you want to bring this back for a review in the future.
If I may, Chair, through you. So just to that point, and to pick up on a few points that have been made by trustees, I will go back to the bullet that says at least every 5 years, or earlier if required by legislative, regulatory, or board-directed change. And those parts are very important because at any point, trustees are able to say, please bring the communication policy back. Trustee Jackula's point is an exact example of that. If we get to a point where we learn something new, or there's a legislative change or a regulatory change or a board-directed change pertaining to our channels of communication that may come at some later time, that then requires us to return to the communication policy and adjust it accordingly. So there are times when trustees will see that policies will come back to this table because a change has occurred in the landscape that requires us. And there are a number of situations of that nature that sit outside of communications that are part of our policy framework, and you'll see coming forward out of cycle. But I think I want to reiterate Senior Manager Eagle's point that setting reasonable expectations that are a net at the outside is one that allows us to have a cadence. So if we have mismatched 2 years for this policy, 5 years for this policy, 3 years for that policy, we will have a very difficult time managing a regular cadence of all the policies that we are responsible for.
Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor. There is a hand on Trustee Penello.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I really appreciate the comments shared and agree with Trustee Edward, Trustee Jackula, their points just around the up to 5 years, and definitely appreciate the Director's clarification on how that interpretation can be applied. I would agree. I only lend a couple extra considerations because I agree with the spirit of the motion in terms of communication evolves very quickly. But I do think that much like when we all began our term, you rely on the competence and the ability to recognize that things may have shifted, and we have the ability to pull things sooner to review. And so I would hope that, the next round of trustees, if there is one, or whomever, has the ability to do that and amend for things such as analytics. I know there's a lot of conversation in the Human Rights Committee about language availability of how we communicate with families and all the languages that are spoken across the families that are part of the Durham District School Board. And so when I'm thinking about all of those components, and I think about the information that communications gathers, and I think about a new forthcoming website or what have you, there's opportunities there to explore alternatives, and I wouldn't want to necessarily over-prescribe some of those pieces, knowing that there is the ability to, so long as there is the acknowledgement and I guess competence to recognize that change is needed or is happening, to pull the policy earlier. So I won't support this motion just for the sake of not being overly prescriptive, because I think up to 5 years is a very fair time frame to gather that information and see how things have shifted. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Pinello. Are there any further comments or questions before we call the question? Seeing no further questions or comments, are we ready to vote? So we are voting on the amendment for the 3 years brought forward by Trustee Cunningham. Can I see your cards or hands raised? Not in favor or in favor? The motion fails. We will now return to the main motion, and I will read it again. It is recommended that the Governance and Policy Committee consider and approve the revised communications policy included as Appendix A and recommend it for final approval at the next regular meeting of the Board of Trustees. Is there further questions or discussion? I will turn to Trustee Pinello.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification for folks online. We don't have the option anymore to indicate a check mark or an X. So if you don't mind saying all in favor and then all opposed, just for when we're voting, so that we have the opportunity to thumbs up or hands up for each respective choice, just because we can't X or check mark anymore. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Helpful. Can we now turn to Trustee Brown for further comment or question?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'm hoping I'm not setting off an explosive here, but I'm on page 25, 5.5, use of artificial intelligence in communications. And I noticed that it was referenced that there was an artificial intelligence guideline. So that then tells me, tell me if I'm right or wrong, is that are we in the process of working on a policy, or are we working still from a guideline?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a background on that. I do know we have a guideline that's been approved and is publicly available on the board website and was developed with significant consultation here at the board. But I do not have any background on whether or not there was any discussion to bring that guidance level document into policy or procedure at this stage.
Okay, seeing there are no questions. Oh, we have Trustee Dracula.
Thank you very much. I've been thinking about the issue, and I would like to bring a motion where we defer consideration of the approval of the policy until next meeting, and that staff present a proposed revised policy that curtails the use of social media by staff for communication with families.
I'm going to ask our recording secretary to put the motion recommended by Trustee Dracula on the screen. Thank you, Recording Secretary Jillian. We have the motion on the screen. At this time, I will ask trustees for further commentary. Trustee Jackal, you may speak once again if you'd like to, or further comments and questions from trustees. Trustee Jackal.
No, thank you.
Trustee Edwards? Sorry, Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you. I would like to see an option of what this could look like. I don't know that this is the only policy I would want brought back. But I am definitely interested in seeing what this could look like, because the points brought up are very valid, that if there are a number of lawsuits against social media companies for their harm with children about us using those services. So I think I would support this motion, but I would want possibly the option to remove it if we determine against it, because I'm not prepared to make a decision on the spot, and I would like to do some serious thinking before next time, but have options come back when they do.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I don't know that the two need to be tied together, so I feel like maybe the policy could move forward. And this is sort of to the point Steve Cunningham raised about there may be other policies that are impacted by social media. Like if we were to want to take a position, that position that we don't want to be communicating on social media, I'd really like to have a good sense of what that means. Like, what does that mean for us to be able to do that? And so I think I would want more information. I think it's a good, I like the idea, because I think we should lead by example, and I just don't know what it looks like. And I think I would want that information from staff first. So I think that that's something that could come and be an amendment to the policy in the future, and maybe other policies, because I don't even know what other policies that might impact. So I'm a little bit on the fence about, so I think I'm going to be opposed to this motion, but I'm not opposed to the idea of pursuing this.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield. Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. For some of the reasons that was mentioned around the questions around this motion, I would like to make a motion to divide the question. The first is on the deferral, and the second would be on the report, because I think that would actually resolve the issue, and that this policy is long awaited. It's been around for too long. It's a one-liner. We have things to go for, but we also have to consider basically ensuring that removing the social media, what social media we do use, or what, in order to relay communications to it, and other policies that affect it. So I'm doing a motion to divide the question, where the question would be that the governance of policy defer consideration of the approval of the policy, and the second is that the staff present a proposed revised policy that entails the use of social media, bring a report to, it says the staff preside a proposed revised policy. Actually, I think he said a report actually in there that would, he did set a report, but anyways, but divide the question. Thank you.
Chair, if I may. So just to be sure that I understand the ask, the deferral of the approval of the policy tonight is one question. The notion of a report that curtails, I'm not sure I'm clear that I understand what the ask is from staff. So bringing a report to trustees around the impact of social media or the impact of removing social media from our communication framework. That may be an informative report that might help trustees then to inform what kind of policy they want around the use of social media, or bringing back a revised policy curtailing the use. Is then that a social media policy that you're looking for? So there are a number of pieces embedded in that question, that perhaps a staged approach, a report first with a social media policy afterwards that has been informed by your perspective on the report, may be a staged approach to getting to what it is that you're driving at.
Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor. I will, just a moment. I will turn to Trustee Cowie. Thank you for patiently waiting.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to follow along here. My apologies. I think the separation of the two, as offered by Trustee Edwards, assists with trying to be able to go through some of these questions of what's already been presented, but still that question on social media, and I think that's a valid report and discussion that we do need to have when looking at it, because I know it's something new that would be considered. I just wanted to highlight to those in attendance that we're seeing this be developed in Australia, where it's been banned for people under the age of from 16 and under, and so there might be some interesting things to look at what the school districts or school systems down there are doing in regards to this. So there is something to look at. It's just we'd have to obviously look at what's being developed, because it's a national ban on 16 and younger there, but there is stuff in place there that we could utilize, and I think it would be interesting to see what our counterparts in another Commonwealth are doing, and a discussion that we do have to have, especially with social media, with everything that's going on, not only internationally, but with some of the companies regarding legal questions, but also in general about the data and where it's being stored.
Thank you, Trustee Cowie. Before I call the next speaker, I would like to ask for a point of clarification from Trustee Edwards, if she'd like to clarify based on the direction of Director Williams-Taylor.
Thank you. The discussion that we were having was on the motion to divide. We can always take, once we do the motion divide, if everybody agrees to do the division of the motion, then we can look at amendments to the second where there seems to be concerned. So my suggestion for process is to do a vote on the motion to divide, and then we can consider the two motions separately, and we can have the discussion around the second motion. Thank you.
Trustee Jackula?
Thank you. I'm wondering if it might be simpler, and I don't know if I'm allowed to withdraw my motion, and then we could simply vote on the policy and then create a new motion with respect to requesting staff to look into the social media aspect of it. Or, if it's already on the floor, we could just vote against it and then move on to the original vote to approve the policy and then come to the second portion, which I get a lot of heads nods. Thank you, not my idea. So perhaps we could proceed in that fashion. That might be the most expeditious way.
Thank you, Trustee Jackula. With the recommendation, at this moment, I will call the question of the motion to divide the current motion. And so if you can, I'm going to call for those all in line as well. All in favor to show your cards and raise hands.
Sorry, Chair, can you just clarify what we're voting on, please?
So we just called the question for the motion to divide. All in favor first. So those that are all, point of clarification. I'm calling the question to divide, the motion to divide, sorry, and I'm only asking for those in favor of that motion. So show of hands, all in favor of that motion. All opposed? Okay, I'm going to return to Trustee Edwards, the mover of that motion, to further clarify.
Thank you. So the motion is on the table is to divide the question, which will divide the two questions on the thing. Then we would consider each of those motions separately. So originally, the way is the approved against the policy would be one consideration, which is what is the existing motion that was presented, a recommendation that was made. And then we would look at the second motion, and we would consider that. And we can make some amendments and changes to that one. So that's sort of the process at this point. So currently what's on the table is the motion to divide the question, whether you agree to that, so we can consider the two items separately, or you don't agree. Thank you. This is the motion that we have on the table.
Trustees, sorry, I need to chair the meeting appropriately. If you will look at the screen, once again, it is based on the current motion only, and that is Trustee Edwards' motion to divide the question. And when we have made the decision on that motion, if the decision fails, we move on to the following motion. If the decision proceeds, we will go on to the second motion. So at this time, I'm going to call the question one more time. And
Sorry, Chair, this is a point of clarification.
Trustee
I had my
Pinello?
hand up. Thanks. Oh my goodness, 1 second. I don't know why that's ringing. Apologies. Sorry, point of clarification, because I'm using subtitles, so I went back to see if I missed this. So we had this motion on the screen to divide the motion, and then Trustee Jackula put forward an offer to withdraw and do another approach to this motion while we still had a live motion. But there wasn't a decision issued by you on whether or not that was being recommended, and then we called the question. But then we voted on your call of the question, and there wasn't a clear outcome of that. So I think that's where at least my confusion's coming, because I'm scrolling back trying to see if I've missed it. So I guess I need clarification on, are we still taking the approach through Trustee Edwards' motion that's currently on the screen? Was there a ruling made on Trustee Jack, or a recommendation, I suppose, on Trustee Jackula's inquiry about withdrawing and doing another approach? And subsequently, did we not just vote on this to divide the motion, and now we're re-voting on it? So I just need clarification on those components, please, because I didn't hear and I do not see clear decisions on those two items. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Pinello. Seeing that there was quite a bit of confusion, just to clarify, we were voting on the motion of Trustee Edwards just to divide. There was clarity, misunderstanding, or there was still questions regarding clarification regarding this. So at this time, I'm going to call on the Secretary of the Board to handle this portion of the question.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I hope that I can be helpful. And so I think that we're at the point where trying to understand what the vote is. So if trustees vote in favor of dividing the motion, then the next conversation becomes, how is the motion divided? So at this point, the chair is calling the question, shall the motion be divided? If that motion fails, what is on the screen is a moot point, and we will return to the original motion around the consideration of the approval of the policy. If that passes, Trustee Jackula will bring forward an additional motion for staff to bring a report around the impact and possible development of a social media policy. So that's the trajectory that we're looking for clarity. So going back to the beginning of that comment, the next step is to either uphold the division of the motion or vote down the division of the motion. Chair, would you like to call the question?
Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor. At this moment, I would like to call the question. I will ask once again with a show of cards, all in favor of dividing the motion. All opposed? Trustee Pinello, are you opposed or in favor?
I was in favor.
Thank you. That motion passes. So at this time, we will now return to the original motion.
So to assist, again, Chair, because the trustees have agreed to divide the motion, the discussion now is the first part of the motion, that the Governance and Policy Committee defer consideration of the approval of the policy, and trustees will need to vote in approval or against that motion. Because now you have two motions on the floor.
Trustee Oldfield?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I'm going to speak against the deferring of the policy. I think that we need a policy better than the one we currently have. And so I think this is a good place to, we have a good foundation, and we can move on and deal with the social media issue separately and have some maybe more fulsome conversation about what that might look like and what we would be looking for from staff.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none. So again, trustees, we are now calling the question only for point 1, that the Governance and Policy Committee defer consideration of the approval of the policy. All in favor? All opposed? The motion fails.
So, Trustee Miller, it's Patrick Cotter here. Sorry, have my camera off. I'm in transit. But I think in light of the fact that that motion failed, the appropriate course now is to go back to the main motion on approval of the policy, because the part 1 of the divided motion superseded the main motion because it was a motion to defer. But I think now the appropriate course is to go back to the main motion Once that main motion is dealt with, then I think you go to part 2 of the divided motion to see if there's a further report on curtailing the use of social media.
Thank you, Council Cotter. At this time, we will now return to the main motion based on our advisement. So we're at the main motion that the Governance and Policy Committee consider and approve the revised communications policy included as Appendix A and recommended for final approval at the next regular meeting of the Board of Trustees. All in favor? That carries. So now we will return to the second portion, part 2. If we can ask our recording secretary to put it back on our screen. Okay, I will read again that staff present a report that curtails the use of social media as a tool to communicate with families, brought forward by Trustee Jackula. Are there any further discussions or questions on this motion? Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I'd like to amend this motion to ask that staff present a report that presents the risks and benefits of policy that curtails the use of social media as a tool to communicate with families, just to add some clarity to staff as to what we're asking for.
Okay, at this time, there is an amendment brought by Trustee by Trustee Cunningham. Is there any discussion on the amendment or any questions? Questions or comments on the amendment only? Trustee Brown.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I actually agree with this motion, but I'm wondering, could I expand the motion to include all policies? And the reason why I'm saying that is that most policies are done based off of another policy, and it does affect other policies. And I understand that there's hundreds of policies, but I also understand that we're also going to rescind a lot of those policies as well. But we do have some newer policies that may indicate social media one way or another in another policy. So I'm wondering what the knock-on effect on this is, and if we are doing this as an ask, then maybe it should be looked at all over, and maybe so the use of social tools to communicate with families and staff, and or all of DDSB, because there are policies that are also operational, which has nothing to do with the board as such, but this might be a really good exercise anyway. And I'm not sure how I'd actually say it. Presents a report that presents the risk and benefits, the policy that curtails use of social media as a tool to communicate with families and maybe staff and students, or communicate with all of DDSB or something along those lines.
Thank you, Trustee
Staff
Brown.
and student, and that's if I can make that amendment or update this motion.
Just before, I would like to call upon staff for comment, just for further advisement.
Thank you, and through you, Chair.
Yeah,
So my suggestion there, Trustee Brown, is that as you continue to name and list it starts to become convoluted. And so when you talk about social media as a tool to communicate, you could simply say as a tool to communicate for communication with and beyond the Durham District School Board. So what that does is it then becomes its own policy around social media that then becomes applicable for all policies depending on the outcome of whatever it is that you learn from the report that comes forward. So it has an enterprise impact. I think that Trustee Cotter was, or sorry, Council Cotter was going to address the process for that amendment, but I don't know that the amendment has been tabled and accepted at this point, so there may be an opportunity to simply retract and reframe that.
Yeah, I was just going to make a suggestion on that, Chair Miller, and through you, that you may just canvass trustees if there's any objection to these amendments rather than having formal votes. There may be some tinkering language around this, including as suggested by the director. So that's my suggestion, is just see if there's any objection to the amendments in red, including with a new amendment as suggested by the director, and then you could move on to vote on number 2.
Thank you. Trustee Brown is the mover of this amendment, and I will ask her to speak to it.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I think this explains. Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor, for that amendment. I do appreciate it. That looks good to me now.
Trustee Oldfield?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The question I have, and I think Trustee Brown talked about it, but didn't actually say it in her amendment. But I don't know whether to assume that this would happen or whether we need to say it. But when a policy is amended, are we going through and checking where it impacts other policy? And would that be coming forward in the report? Like, I want to think that would happen without having to say that in a motion. But if that's not the case, then I might want to make an amendment. But I want to ask the question first, because if it is just part and parcel of it, then I will just leave it.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield. I will again request staff to make a response or clarify that point.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, and to your question, and I do remind trustees, because we haven't used this process in a while, that when we do have a motion that directs staff to engage with a report back to trustees, we do have a formula and a format for that allows for clarity and that the mover is able to expand and be clear about the expectation for staff. So in this case, we do have Trustee Jackula moved the motion to begin the conversation. And so the staff person who would be undertaking this, and it would fall under Superintendent Associate Director Markowski, he would come back to the trustees in question for completing that document, which would allow for that input to be a part of it. Following up with that, when we do present to trustees the requested report, there is a discussion that would ensue. And so coming with the recommended and expected data to inform that question would be a part of the discussion before a motion might arise to give staff direction then around the policies. So there's a lot of room within this structure to allow for that to come forward.
Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor. I'll turn it over to Trustee Piniello.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Director Williams-Taylor answered one half of my two questions, because I do recall there being a document that allows us to be a little more specific for staff around what the report would entail, which I believed we developed last year. My second question, though, I think just had to do with perhaps how, and maybe it's for Council Cotter through you, Chair, with how we amend an amendment within the committee. So I don't believe Trustee Cunningham's initial one was seconded. So does that enable us to make further changes and amendments to proposed language without having to go back and vote on the, does that make sense, Council Cotter? I'm just,
Yes,
Okay,
and thank you, Trustee Pinello, and through you, Chair Miller. So technically, we should be voting on each of these amendments in reverse order. So we should do Trustee Brown's and then Trustee Cunningham's. But at the committee level, often, you know, we do adopt a more informal structure so we can move the meeting along without getting caught up in these types of technical issues. So that's why I was suggesting, like, it doesn't appear that there's a lot of objection here. It's just going to be some wordsmithing. So I think as long as nobody's objecting, and if somebody objects, they should speak up. But as long as nobody's objecting, I suggest that trustees wordsmith this and then vote on it one time, so that we don't have to go through layers of motions to get this done. So, as I say, I think if somebody has a problem, they should object, and then we could do it formally. But unless and until that happens, Chair Miller, I suggest you just allow trustees to make suggestions and try to work through this cooperatively and get it done without all the procedural wrangling.
Thank you, Council Cotter. I was going to make a similar suggestion. Trustee Pinello, does that answer your question? Okay, at this time, are there any further comments or questions? Seeing none, can I see all those that are in favor of the amendment? It's unanimous, it carries. Thank you, trustees. We are now on to the next recommended action, which is our draft records and information management policy. And I will turn it over to our records manager, Krista Rodriguez. Oh, sorry. Give me one moment. That is correct. Again, so we will now turn to our records manager, Krista Rodriguez. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. Good evening, committee members. I'm here this evening to present the proposed Records and Information Management Policy for your consideration and approval. You can find this report on page 38. I will speak briefly to the context for this policy, what it establishes for the board, and why it is being brought forward at this time. This policy has been developed in response to legislative requirements and evolving provincial expectations for information management practices across Ontario school boards. Under the Education Act, school boards are required to establish a formal program of records management, including schedules for how long records are kept and how they are managed. The policy before you, included as Appendix A on page 44, fulfills that requirement, which is outlined in greater detail in Section 5.1 of the report. In addition, the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario has recently published guidance to all school boards in Ontario regarding strengthening information management and privacy practices in alignment with legislation such as the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, otherwise known as MDPA, and the Enhancing Digital Security and Trust Act, which is a new piece of legislation formerly known as Bill 194. This direction emphasizes the importance of having formal retention schedules supported by clear policies and procedures. The proposed policy responds directly to those expectations, and this provincial context is described in sections 3 and 5.2 of your report. The policy establishes the governance framework for how the board manages its recorded information, which includes, for example, board meeting minutes, student records, registration, and contracts that support the delivery of programs and services, to name a few. At a practical level, it ensures that information held by the board is managed securely, consistently, and in compliance with legislative requirements. It provides clear direction to staff, it establishes accountability, and it allows the board to demonstrate responsible stewardship of the information entrusted to it. The policy is guided by widely recognized public sector principles and best practices that focus on accountability, transparency, and the protection of information. These principles reflect the standard of practice expected of an organization of this size and complexity. This is set out in Section 6.2 of your report and reflected in Appendix A at Section 6.5. Together, these elements demonstrate the board's commitment to responsible records and information management and support public trust. It is also important to note that this policy does not stand alone. As referenced in Section 5 and 6 of your report, the policy is supported by operational tools, including the Records and Information Management Procedure, in your report as Appendix B on page 49, and the Records Retention and Classification Schedule. The retention schedule was developed using the Ontario Association of School Business Officials, otherwise known as OASBO's, provincial model, which school boards across the province are currently adopting and implementing. Approval of this policy would complete the framework required to formally establish the board's records management program. It provides authority, oversight, and consistency across the organization, sets clear expectations and accountability for managing records in the custody or control of the DDSB, and supports consistent practices across schools and departments. From a broader perspective, this work also aligns with the board's strategic priorities while establishing a consistent, compliant, and secure approach to managing records and information. In closing, the proposed Records and Information Management Policy fulfills a legislative requirement under the Education Act and positions the board to meet evolving provincial expectations for information management and practices across school boards in Ontario. This evening, it is recommended that the Governance and Policy Committee approve the proposed policy and recommend that it proceed to the Board of Trustees for final adoption. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Records Manager Krista Rodriguez. Is there a trustee willing to move the recommendation included in the report? Trustee Brown?
Thank you. Yes, I would like to move that motion. I move that it is recommended that the Governance and Policy Committee consider and approve the proposed records and information policy included as Appendix A, and that the matter proceed to the next regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for final approval.
Thank you, Trustee Brown. The table is now open for discussion and questions from trustees. Trustee Brown?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I do have a question about the records management, because what I've noticed, and I don't know if this is like a totally out there question, but I know that with retaining and retention of records has different time periods and time limits, not necessarily all. And I think it would have been interesting to see a table of the things that you've outlined in the policy and what it is currently. So if it's 7 years, 5 years, or whatever the current retention is on certain high-level documents. I think that would have been interesting to see, just not an extensive table of every single thing, but more when I'm looking at, like records retention and classification schedule. You know, like, is there a time for that? Like, is it 7 years? I don't know. And I think that would have been interesting to look at as part of this policy. And it would be just for 2026, understanding that that can change depending on what rules get changed. So that's that's what I would like to have seen to understand this a little bit better. But otherwise, it's a great policy.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, I'm happy to provide a sample or an index, very high level, to show you what it entails. In addition, in the procedure on Appendix B, it does break down the structure of the retention schedule, how it is divided based on business classification, and gives you a very high level of how that is organized. However, I'm happy to provide a sample index for you to get a better understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards?
Thank you. I'm thrilled with this policy in that I kind of wonder how we survived without such a policy for this many years. And so I'm really thrilled to see it, and it's very extensive and thorough. I appreciate the work that was put into it. I kind of had a similar question around the retention schedule, because I'm used to seeing a general retention schedule that is included part of the policy, just for guidelines. And I just sort of figure when anybody is trying to request a record, although I mean, I might do it, I know other people may not, but it would be really helpful too if I'm requesting a particular record, and if I already know generally which category it falls into, and I look at the retention and say, oh, wow, it's too late to do it. I mean, it actually helps people when they try to request records. And I'm not talking through freedom of information. I just know from parents and families or anything else when we're trying to say, if, oh, it's already destroyed, then that's great. We know that, so we don't have to ask it. So it's just a general schedule based on the classifications that you've got there, is that this is generally what it is. We know that it will vary, but that usually is part of a procedure. That's just a comment I have. But thank you so much for all the work that was done on this policy.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. We will find that some of what is being requested is actually captured in the procedure, given that there is a greater agility with the procedure as different kinds of documents emerge, and we may get different kinds of directives that come. And so we do appreciate the support on the work that has gone into the heavy lift of the policy, but we do recognize the transparency that is requested, and we believe that we are capturing some of that in the procedure, and we'll continue to review that.
Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor. Is there any further comments or questions from trustees? Seeing none at this time, I'd like to call the question. If you're ready to vote, can I see all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you, trustees. Seeing that we have no further business at this time, can I have a mover to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, Trustee Oldfield. All in favor? Thank you. The meeting is now adjourned.